Most people only realize they have changed when things have already gone too far to fully return. At first, it is very small. So small that you are not even sure it is real. A conversation that once made you feel lighter suddenly feels heavy. A joke that once made you laugh now only makes you look down in silence. A room full of familiar people, full of voices, full of laughter. And yet, strangely, you sit there, as if your mind has already left long before your body knows how to stand up. You are still there, but you are no longer truly there. You try to ignore the feeling. You tell yourself maybe you are just tired, maybe you are stressed, maybe everything is still the same and your mood is simply off today. But somewhere deeper, a part of you knows that something has shifted. And the most frightening part is this. The first thing that changed was not them, it was you. Carl Jung understood a painful truth about psychological maturity. It often separates a person from the unconscious comfort of the collective. Not because that person wants to isolate themselves, not because they think they are above anyone, but because once awareness begins to expand, the mind can no longer live peacefully in environments that only function when everyone remains asleep. You once thought this loneliness meant you were being left behind. But sometimes, loneliness is not a punishment. Sometimes it is evidence. Evidence that your mind has started moving toward a place your old environment can no longer follow. And the strange thing is, other people can feel this before you ever say a word. They sense that your energy is different. You do not laugh the same way anymore. You do not share the same way anymore. You do not need constant validation the way you once did. You no longer try to keep everyone comfortable at the cost of your own silence. You think you are simply becoming calmer. But to many people, that calmness is a threat. Because people do not only respond to words. People respond to the change in your emotional position. And when you no longer stand where you used to stand, the entire system around you begins to feel unstable. Human beings are deeply tribal creatures. Even though modern society makes us believe we are independent, free, and rational, underneath all of it, there is still an ancient fear. The fear of being cast out of the group. The fear of no longer being accepted. The fear of standing alone outside the familiar circle. That is why so many people betray themselves just to stay included. They laugh at jokes that do not feel funny. They stay silent in moments that make them uncomfortable. They shrink their dreams because they are afraid others will feel threatened. They pretend to agree so the room does not change temperature. They soften their pain so they will not be called too sensitive. Every group has invisible rules. Be like us. Be predictable. Keep your role. Do not grow too far. Do not see too much. Do not become calmer than we are. Do not have clearer boundaries than we do. Do not make us look at our own stagnation. Those rules are rarely spoken out loud, but you can feel them in the air. You feel them when you speak about a serious goal and the room suddenly goes quiet. You feel them when you mention discipline, solitude, healing, and someone immediately turns it into a joke. You feel them when you stop participating in gossip and suddenly people stop pulling you into the circle as often. They do not always hate you. Sometimes, they simply do not know what to do with a version of you that no longer validates the old emotional level of the group. People do not always resent your weakness. Many times, they resent the possibility that you might rise beyond them. When you are weak, you are easier to approach. When you are insecure, you are easier to predict. When you need approval, you are easier to keep. But when you begin to develop discipline, distance, silence, and self-respect, you become a mirror. And not everyone can tolerate that mirror. Your maturity forces certain people to face what they have been avoiding. Your discipline exposes their delay. Your self-respect exposes their self-abandonment. Your calmness exposes their chaos. Your ambition exposes the dreams they buried years ago. And because very few people want to look directly at that pain, they react in more subtle ways. They become sarcastic. They withdraw their support. They call your boundaries an attitude. They call your silence ego. They call your maturity a negative change. But what bothers them is not that your morality has changed. What bothers them is that your awareness has changed. If this part touches something you have lived through, leave one simple sentence: I am seeing more clearly. Sometimes, naming the truth is enough to help you stop doubting yourself. When awareness opens, the first thing it takes away is innocence. You begin to realize that some people only call you when they need emotional reassurance. You begin to realize that some friendships do not exist because of depth, but because both people are distracting each other from themselves. You begin to realize that some groups are not bonded by real love, but by shared complaining, shared gossip, shared insecurity, or shared stagnation. That is an uncomfortable realization. Many relationships were never built on true understanding. They were built on psychological convenience. As long as you play the right role, everything seems fine. You are the listener. You are the funny one. You are the easygoing one. You are the rescuer. You are the one who always understands. You are the one who is always available. You are the one who does not make things difficult. But the moment you stop performing the identity assigned to you, people react as if you have betrayed them. And in a way, you have. Not betrayed them as human beings, but betrayed the unconscious contract they had with the old version of you. That contract said you would remain accessible. You would continue tolerating. You would continue putting other people's needs ahead of your own. You would continue calming the room. You would continue making sure nobody had to face themselves. But one day, you stop. You no longer reply immediately. You no longer over-explain. You no longer forgive automatically. You no longer turn kindness into an unlocked door. And that is when the truth begins to appear. Kindness without boundaries quietly teaches people how to take advantage of you. If you always show up, they begin to treat your presence as guaranteed. If you always minimize your pain, they learn they do not have to care about it. If you always come back after being overlooked, they begin to believe overlooking you has no consequences. The pain is not simply that you were not loved. The pain is realizing that some people only loved the convenience you provided. They loved your energy. They loved your reassurance. They loved your attention. They loved your availability. They loved the version of you that did not require them to grow. But when you stop offering those things for free, they call you different. The truth is, you are not different in the way they think. You are simply no longer willing to be used under the name of closeness. Jung called one of the most important tasks of human life individuation. Becoming who you truly are beneath the masks, roles, and expectations of the collective. But individuation has a brutal side that few people talk about. It isolates you, not always physically. You may still have friends, still have family, still have coworkers, still have everyday conversations. But inside, you begin to feel that you no longer live on the same level of consciousness as many of the people around you. Conversations that once felt familiar start to repeat themselves. Energy that once felt normal begins to feel heavy. The kind of fun that once gave you a sense of belonging now makes you feel even further away. You realize that many people do not truly want to know who they are. They only want to continue living in the socially acceptable version of themselves. They become reflections of the room. With one person, they are one kind of person. With another group, they become another version. In their family, they wear one mask. In their friendships, they wear another. Online, they wear yet another. And eventually, they forget which face is real. You were once like that too. You once changed your voice to fit the room. You once hid your thoughts so nobody would feel uncomfortable. You once held back your dreams so you would not be called unrealistic. You once swallowed your intuition so you could continue belonging. But once awareness expands, forcing yourself back into the old state creates inner friction. Your mind begins to split into two versions: the person you are becoming and the person others still expect you to be. That division is what exhausts you. That is why you can feel strangely tired around people from your old life. They are not always toxic. Sometimes they are simply tied to an outdated identity of yours. Being near them requires you to reactivate a version of yourself you have already outgrown. You have to speak the old way, laugh the old way, react the old way, care about the old things. And at some point, your soul refuses to keep performing. That exhaustion is not weakness. It is a signal. A part of you is saying, I cannot keep living in this old shape anymore. Jung believed that every person carries a shadow. It is the part of the psyche that is denied, pushed down, and hidden behind the social image a person wants to protect. The shadow contains envy, resentment, fear, feelings of inferiority, the need for control, abandoned dreams, instinctive parts of the self that the ego does not want to admit. Most people do not face their shadow. They negotiate with it, they justify it. They disguise it with language that sounds reasonable. Envy is called concern. Cruelty is called honesty. Control is called love. Emotional dependency is called loyalty. Fear is called practical advice. But when you grow, you unintentionally activate other people's shadow. You do not have to do anything dramatic. It is enough that you need them less, that you are calmer, clearer, more boundaried, more purposeful. That you no longer react to shame the way you used to. That you are no longer controlled by guilt the way you once were. That is enough. Some families maintain control through guilt. Some friendships maintain control through emotional dependency. Some groups maintain control through mockery. Some relationships maintain control by making you fear that if you change, you will be abandoned. The moment you stop responding to those mechanisms, the old structure begins to collapse, and that collapse makes people uncomfortable. They may not always know why. They only feel that you are no longer in their hands the way you used to be. You are no longer predictable, no longer easy to guilt, no longer easy to pull into the old loop, no longer easy to turn yourself into the wrong one just to save the connection. That is when they may begin to undermine your confidence. They joke about your dreams. They doubt your discipline. They say you are doing too much. They say you have been influenced. They say you are not as fun as you used to be. But listen carefully. Sometimes people do not miss the joyful version of you. They miss the manageable version of you. The old you tolerated more, stayed silent more, explained more, apologized more, made them feel emotionally safer because you did not force them to change the way they treated you. The new you no longer does that. And to people who relied on your unconsciousness, your awareness will always feel like a betrayal. There is a stage where you feel deeply angry, angry that they do not understand, angry that they do not see how much you have tried, angry that they only remember the useful version of you, not the exhausted person behind it. Angry that when you finally begin to have boundaries, they behave as if you have done something wrong. But after enough disappointments, something colder than anger appears. Clarity. And clarity is far more dangerous than anger. Anger still contains hope. Hope that they will understand. Hope that one more conversation will change things. Hope that if you explain yourself gently enough, clearly enough, kindly enough, they will finally see your heart. But clarity is different. Clarity no longer begs, no longer tries to win, no longer tries to make someone understand something they benefit from not understanding, no longer romanticizes human behavior. You begin to see that many people do not live from truth. They live from survival mechanisms. They choose a personality based on what helps them remain accepted. They bend their morals under social pressure. They support you when you are only potential, but become uneasy when that potential begins to become real. You realize maturity does not come with age. Many adults are simply older children with more socially acceptable coping mechanisms. Some run into entertainment, some run into work, some run into relationships, some run into substances, some run into endless noise, Very few people sit alone long enough to meet themselves honestly. That is why silence frightens so many people, because when the noise disappears, the buried things begin to rise. Regret, envy, insecurity, emptiness, fear, the shadow. And most people run towards stimulation as soon as they feel those things appear. But if you stay with the silence long enough, you change. You stop needing constant approval. You stop performing different emotional versions of yourself just to maintain connection. You stop chasing belonging from people who secretly feel threatened by your maturity. And slowly, you understand. Not everyone can understand your transformation. Some people are only compatible with earlier versions of you. This is one of the hardest truths to swallow. Not everyone who drifts away from you is an enemy. Not everyone who no longer fits is a bad person. Not every ending needs a villain. Sometimes the connection was simply temporary. Some people belong to who you used to be. The version that needed validation. The version that was more agreeable. The version willing to shrink. The version that could sit in conversations that were no longer true just to avoid feeling left out. And when you are no longer that version, the connection no longer knows how to exist. This creates guilt, especially a deep and empathetic person. You start wondering if you are becoming arrogant, if you are isolating too much, if you're pushing people away, if you're becoming difficult. But there is a difference between becoming emotionally unavailable and becoming emotionally selective. One comes from ego, the other comes from awareness. Ego says, I am better than them. Awareness says, I can no longer betray myself just to belong. When you become more selective, you begin to notice patterns almost immediately. The friend who only appears when they need to be rescued, the person who hides envy behind humor, the group that punishes individuality through mockery, the relationship that survives only through guilt and obligation, the apology that sounds like a rehearsed script, the forced enthusiasm, the kindness that is not consistent. Once you see these patterns, you cannot unsee them. That is the curse of awareness. It removes pleasant illusions. People often say they want the truth, but truth does not only illuminate, it rearranges relationships. Truth exposes the power dynamics hidden beneath politeness. Truth shows you how many interactions are actually transactional. Truth forces you to admit that some people only love the version of you they can control. And the darker realization is this. Many people liked the old you, not because you were happier, but because you were easier to manage. If you want to keep hearing content that goes straight into truths like this, subscribe to the channel. Not for cheap motivation, but for a place that reminds you that clarity is not coldness. Something very strange happens in the process of maturing. Peace begins to feel more attractive than stimulation. Before, you may have confused emotional highs and lows with depth. You thought that if a relationship made you unstable, maybe it must be meaningful. You thought that if someone could hurt you deeply, maybe they must matter deeply. You thought that if you had to constantly fight to be kept, maybe that was love or loyalty. But when awareness matures, you begin to see another truth. Chaos can also become addictive, especially for people who grew up in emotionally unstable environments. Some people learn to earn love through usefulness. Some learn to survive by becoming agreeable. Some become hyper-aware of other people's emotions because unpredictability once felt dangerous. Some become used to reading every facial expression, every silence, every shift in tone, just to know whether they are still safe. Over time, a coping mechanism becomes an identity. The helper, the mediator, the one who is always fine, the one who always listens, the one who is always available, the one who makes everything lighter. But the human psyche cannot carry roles forever when those roles were never born from truth. Eventually, exhaustion asks a frightening question. If I stop pretending for everyone, who will stay? Many people do not dare ask that question because their entire social identity depends on external reaction. Praise becomes self-worth, attention becomes proof of existence, belonging becomes morality. But the moment you separate yourself from the constant need to be accepted, you begin to see society differently. You see how many people betray their intuition to maintain acceptance. How many people stay silent in rooms where they secretly disagree with everyone. How many people tolerate disrespect just to avoid loneliness. How many people apologize for the very traits that make others uncomfortable. Most people are not living authentically. They are negotiating for survival. And when you stop negotiating in the same way, your presence becomes unsettling to them. One day, you will realize that what you are grieving is not always the person. You are grieving the illusion. The illusion that someone who was once close will always understand. The illusion that time spent together automatically creates depth. The illusion that loyalty will survive every transformation. The illusion that someone who belonged to your past automatically has a place in your emotional future. But time does not always create depth. Sometimes it only creates familiarity, and familiarity can hide incompatibility for years. Some people talk every day but never touch anything true. Some people stay in a group for a long time but are only loved when they keep playing the old role. Some people are surrounded by many others and still feel deeply lonely because every connection around them is built on habit, not resonance. Shallow connections can protect you from loneliness for a while, but over time, they suffocate self-awareness. You begin to censor your thoughts, lower your ambition, hide your growth, laugh smaller, dream smaller, speak less truth, live in a way that fits the room. Not because you are not growing, but because you have learned that some environments punish authenticity. And that punishment is not always direct. It comes through mockery, dismissal, silence, emotional withdrawal, passive resistance. Human beings are very good at enforcing conformity without ever saying, conform. Carl Jung understood that the collective mind constantly pressures the individual to remain asleep, because true individuality makes society uneasy. A person who sees themselves clearly becomes difficult to categorize, and society prefers people it can label. The obedient one, the funny one, the broken one, the rescuer, the entertainer, the silent one, the one who is always available. When people know your role, they know how to interact with you. But when you outgrow that role, confusion appears. And confusion quickly becomes discomfort. That is why some people try to pull you back. Not always because they have bad intentions. Sometimes they simply miss the version of you that required less from them. The hardest confrontation in the process of maturing is not with other people. It is with yourself. Because at some point, you realize you also participated in those illusions. You ignored warning signs to avoid loneliness. You tolerated imbalance because feeling needed made you feel important. You betrayed your intuition to preserve connection. You confused tension with love. You confused familiarity with safety. You confused emotional dependency with depth. This realization hurts because it takes away the comforting story that you were only passive in everything that happened. The shadow is not only what others hide from themselves, it is also what you hide from yourself. The fear of abandonment, the addiction to recognition, the unconscious need to be chosen. The habit of becoming useful in order to be loved. The tendency to forgive too quickly so you do not have to face loss. Most people spend their whole lives studying others while remaining strangers to themselves. They know who hurt them, but they do not know why they keep returning to the same kind of pain. They know who disrespects them, but they do not know which part of them still fears losing that person more than losing themselves. Self-awareness is brutal. It destroys one comforting story after another. But if you go deep enough, it also frees you. You begin to understand that many people do not connect through truth. They connect through shared avoidance of truth, through shared distraction, through shared performances, through emotional dependency that has been given the wrong name, love. That is why authentic people become rare. Authentic people break social illusions simply by existing. They force others to see the distance between who they truly are and who they are pretending to be. And most people would rather protect the mask than face the mirror. Because the mask is rewarded by society, the mirror is dangerous. After enough disappointments, a new stillness appears inside you. Not coldness, precision. You stop expecting emotional depth from people who survive through shallowness. You stop explaining boundaries to people who are committed to misunderstanding them. You stop chasing responses from people who only understand relationships through personal benefit. You stop sharing the deepest parts of yourself with people who turn depth into something strange. And oddly enough, life becomes clearer. Loneliness changes shape too. At first, it feels like abandonment. Later, it begins to feel like protection. Because when your awareness becomes sharper, you begin to understand how psychologically dangerous unconscious people can be. Not because they always intend to harm you, but because people who lack self-awareness often project their chaos onto everyone around them, while believing they are innocent. They create confusion and call it love. They control and call it care. They manipulate and call it passion. They make you feel guilty and call it loyalty. And the troubling part is that many of them truly believe their own story. Human beings are experts at self-deception. The ego constantly creates stories to protect itself from painful truths. Few people want complete honesty about who they are. They want a version of truth that still preserves their self-image. That is why accountability is so rare. Many people do not face their darkness. They dress it up. They turn envy into concern, cruelty into honesty, possessiveness into love, emotional dependency into loyalty. But when you see clearly through those disguises, you become less available to them. You become quieter, more observant, more selective. Not because you are above anyone, but because you have learned that energy is also a form of truth. Some people make you expand, some make you feel fragmented, some make your nervous system tighten before your rational mind can explain why. Your body often recognizes the truth before your mind does. Share this video with someone who has been wondering why they suddenly feel distant from their old life. Maybe they do not need more advice. Maybe they just need to know that this feeling does not make them wrong. At some point, growth requires separation. Not because isolation is always better, not because you must leave everyone behind, but because transformation needs space away from constant unconscious influence. You cannot become a new person while being pulled back into the old role every day. You cannot heal in an environment that still benefits from your wounds. You cannot build self-respect in a place where your self-respect is called selfish. You cannot step into truth if every room around you asks you to keep pretending. Every major evolution of identity contains loss. Loss of familiarity, loss of comfort, loss of an old sense of belonging, loss of certain relationships, loss of the illusion that everything can return to the way it was. But illusion is expensive. It takes authenticity. It takes self-respect. It takes inner peace. It takes your ability to hear yourself. Many people pay that price for their entire lives because they are afraid to stand alone. But there is something more frightening than loneliness, becoming a stranger to yourself just so others will continue accepting you. The deepest truth is that outgrowing certain people is not really about them. It is about the death of the version of you that once needed them in order to feel whole. That version once believed that without them, you would not be enough. That version once believed being needed was the same as being loved. That version once feared silence more than falsehood. That version once called shrinking harmony, but that version is dying. And when it dies, you will hurt. You will miss things. You will doubt yourself. There will be days when you want to go back, not because the old place was better, but because the old place was familiar. But once you have awakened, you cannot fully return to unconsciousness. You can stand in front of the old door. You can remember the old laughter. You can remember the old version of yourself. But you will know that if you walk back in, you will have to leave yourself outside. And this time you cannot do that anymore. You are not broken. You are not becoming cold. You have not lost your ability to love. You are only losing the version of yourself that had to betray itself in order to belong. And sometimes, the price of waking up is realizing you can no longer sleep beside people who still need you inside their dream.